When I was younger, I always thought my responsibility was to follow the path that other people had imagined for me. And for a while, I really tried. I checked those boxes, I fulfilled the expectations, but inside I always felt this tension. What if I spend the rest of my life living somebody else's dream instead of my own? If you've ever felt that push and pull, honoring your family's sacrifices, their expectations, while wondering if there is ever space for your own joy, your own creativity, your own rest, you are not alone. That's exactly what today's conversation is about. So today I'm joined by my husband, Mike, and our dear friends, Auntie Alice and Uncle Jon, as my kids know them, a married couple who have lived this tension really out loud. Alice traded pre-med for a career leading in the art world, and Jon stepped away from banking to pursue acting. Together, they've really built a partnership that makes room for courage, creativity, and rest. You'll hear how to navigate family expectations without losing yourself, why rest can be one of the most radical choices that we make, and what it looks like to build a bold life together. Let's dive in. One of the things I so admire about the both of you is that you've always, from my perspective, really lived outside of the box or any sort of Asian stereotype. Can you share with the audience, what does it mean to live a creative life on your own terms, especially as an AAPI person?
I would say that it's digging deep and trying to figure out who you are authentically, because for so long growing up in my life, I lived the life of what my parents wanted of me. And I respected that. I didn't begrudge them, but there's always a push and pull on that, right? And it wasn't until I was probably in college that I really looked into like, what gives me joy? What do I love?
Yeah.
What drives me and fuels me? And what was so insane was, studying pre-med in college. I did it because that's what I do. And I was okay at it. I wasn't, terrible. I wasn't great either. But then when I started taking some art history classes, learning about art, and I've always loved museums, but really being in the thick of it, it felt like air to me. It felt like water. It felt like I needed this to live. And that was the first time that really struck a chord about like, what is my life going to look like? And then I foresaw what it could look like if I continued what my parents wanted, and it stifled me. It just felt so wrong, like in such a cellular level, that it took time to kind of come to grips with that, telling them what I wanted, figuring out how I'm going to make this work for me. But at the end of the day, it felt the most, gut feeling of like, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And I'm going to have to make it work somehow. As scared as my parents might be about, can I live? Can I live in Manhattan? Can I feed myself? All those are very valid. But I also knew that I had the ability and the tools to make it work for myself if this is what I wanted.
Yeah.
So since that point on, I never looked back. I just always trusted my gut, my thoughts, my feelings. And I was always also very stubborn and sure of myself. So I think that has really served me. But effectively, since that point on, since I was like 20 years old,
Yeah. No.
many decades later.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Alice. I feel like so many of us can really identify with that feeling of, I'm going to do and honor what my parents want of me. But at a cellular level, I really feel like this is just not the pathway for me. And I'm curious to know, Jon, could you talk a little bit about your relationship with creativity growing up? Was it nurtured? Was it ignored? Was it discouraged? Did you always know that you wanted to pursue acting at some point in your adult life?
So I didn't really grow up around a lot of creatives. I was only child number one, okay?
Yeah.
And, typical Asian parents. My dad was 7th-generation Chinese. My mom came over when she was 21 to the US. And they always envisioned that I would be a doctor, but I hated blood, so that was never going to happen. Or some other type of profession, like a lawyer, so typical Asian stereotype type career path. So when I decided to go to college, so I went to NYU, got into the business school, and eventually started to dabble during my first couple of years in other things other than finance or non-finance subjects. And also my roommates in college, the two guys were one was an actor, one was a writer. They were in the Tisch School of the Arts. So their lives just sound so much cooler and more exciting than mine, or the career that I was trying to pursue, the major that I was going for, which was finance. So I started taking some courses and I got really interested. I took acting 101, I took creative writing, I took film production, and I got really interested. And I actually tried to transfer halfway through from the business school to the film school. And so That didn't happen because I was too late into my 2 years, and I would have had to study for a fifth year and pay more money to extend. But it was always in the back of my mind. And then the other thing kind of holding me back was I had student loans, and obviously I was forced to go to NYU by my mom because she was closer to home. I actually got a partial scholarship to go to USC. And if I had pursued that, I probably would have had a little more leeway in terms of pursuing my dream. But because I was strapped to a student loan and a very expensive private school in New York, I think getting a job on Wall Street was more practical.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I didn't realize that you had that moment in your college career to pause and say, wait a minute, I think I want to transition into acting and start really exploring that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know from both of you, Alice, you making this transition from pre-med into a museum context, and Jon starting off the business school, but then thinking about acting possibly. I'm curious, how did your families take that?
I didn't really tell them, right?
Oh, okay. That works too.
That's the motivation way of pursuing it. I kept a lot of it to myself. A lot of my influences during college kind of grew on me, but I never said, hey, mom, I want to be a film producer one day, Yeah. So, I joined a fraternity house in college, and one of my older fraternity brothers, a guy named Warren Spurlock, he was a film producer. He did a short film called Super Size Me, which is about people eating McDonald's.
Oh,
Piece. And then, there was just a lot of people in my house, right? And there was another guy in my house. His name was Kevin. And and I was really into DJing at the time, right? So I was literally the Thursday night resident DJ because Fridays we'd have class. We threw all these house parties in our fraternity house. And then one of my older fraternity brothers, Kevin, a Japanese guy, and he's like, no, don't pursue your dreams. Stay in the business school, be a banker or, broker or whatever. My loser brother in LA is trying to be a full-time DJ. You don't want to go that route because you're never going to make any money. You're going to starve to death. And behold, his brother is a guy named Steve Aoki. Have you ever heard of him? But he's
yeah. Have we ever heard of him?
He's in a while now. So I kind of feel like I missed my moment in creativity, both in the film and acting, and also the musician side of me.
That's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. And yes, I don't know Steve Aoki personally, but yes, heard of him. Alice, how about you?
Oh, it was not easy.
It was not easy. Okay. Because your brother is also a doctor as well. He was the dutiful oldest son. He pursued medicine.
He did what he was supposed to do as a child. Or we're all immigrants, actually. We all came in as children. But it was a lot of kitchen table moments where this is where we have our very serious talks with my family. Mm-hmm. A conversation that devolves into fight, essentially, every single time. And it would always start with this is what I want. This is my life. I get to do what I want to do with my life. And my parents saying, no, we're worried about you. Very, very fair arguments. But at the end of the day, it was a lot of you have to trust me. Let me try this. I want to do this. Give me a chance. I understand the risks involved. And, we're from middle class, hardworking family. So it's not like they had money to support me if it didn't work out. This was, I go at it or I fail. And that was understandable. And I knew that going in, and I knew the risks involved. But then I was also thankful in the fact, I was okay, doesn't work out. I'm going to try it for 6 months. I can always just fall back into science. I can always just go back into doing, lab research, which would kill my soul, but it would pay the rent, right? Mm-hmm. There was a lot of faith in myself, and it was just faith that it was going to work out somehow. I just got to work at it, because of all the things that they teach you about work ethic. I'm really, really thankful for that because that's what led me through it. Yeah. But those conversations were not easily had. There was many of them. I had 4 years in college, but the last 2 years was a difficult slog through it all. Mm-hmm. But as I was learning and gaining the knowledge for art history, it gave me so much hope, and that's what helped me.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And Mike, I'm going off script by asking this question, but I'm just so compelled to hear from both of you because what I hear from your stories is that you just had this sort of and Jon, you didn't say this specifically, but Alice, I think you referred to this inner knowing, you just knew this was not the pathway for me. And so many of us in the Asian community, or maybe just in general, we know that this is not the right pathway for ourselves. To the listener who wants to know, what do I do to actually take those steps?
I think it takes a lot of courage, right? I think I am very easily influenced, right? So I am what's called a marketer's dream, right? So if someone tells me to do something or go jump, I'll jump, right? Or I'll say how high, right? So I'm ambitious, but I'm also more of a follower than a leader most of the time. And so therefore, like, I'm very conscious of my surroundings and my peers and like what, who's doing what, what's trending, what's popular. But I wish I had the courage earlier on in life to get a bigger head start, because I waited a lot longer, and where I felt like, at least for acting and DJing and like those things weren't really in vogue for Asians until very recently, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Asian Hollywood took a long time to lift off, right? Before,
Right.
I was, more, there's a lot more in Hollywood now than before. But yeah, I would say just liquid courage, whatever that means to you.
Liquid courage. Yeah. Definitely.
Liquid courage, sorry, I meant.
Thanks for that clarification, but I got you. It does. It takes a lot of courage to discount the internal and the external messages and to really lock in on like, what do you want? But Jon, to your point, to also just be noticing what's happening around you, right? Being cognizant of like the trends and what people are saying, what people are doing, and sort of measuring. You didn't use this word, but like just being strategic about those next steps. It sounds like that's a big part of it.
I would say, just to John's point, how he cares about what other people are seeing or thinking around him, I would say I'm the opposite. Like, I just did not care what anyone thought or felt.
Okay.
I just knew that what I needed to do, so I was going to do it. If I look back in the moment of thinking those things, it was more the alternative that scared me the most. Thinking like, oh, if my life is going to be, say, 800 hours of residency at some place that does not give me joy and give me that fuels the sense of purpose for me, that was more scary to me than doing what I loved.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? Like saying like, I have this one life and this is my chance. And do I want to spend these hours doing this, whatever this is, for anyone else? And knowing it just brings dread. You don't want to wake up in the morning. You don't want to feel bogged down and depressed as you go through the day. Like, that to me was even more terrifying than pursuing what I loved. Because I always knew that in some way, because I loved it, I will succeed in some way, shape, or form. You know what I mean? Like it never felt like I will fail miserably. But even with that, if you fail, that's okay. That's how you learn. That's how you get up, right?
Yeah.
I literally knocked on every door and just trying to figure out where was I going to be in the art world. And it didn't matter to me because I loved all of it.
Yeah.
And in time, I determined what I was good at, what I wasn't, what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do. But I just felt that if I just follow my parents' dream in my life, then what a wasted life that was.
Yeah. Well, I definitely hear you on that. I think it's interesting. Have you guys heard of the Jeff Bezos regret minimization framework?
No.
A high level, but yeah, what about it?
The whole concept is basically, imagine you're 90 years old on your deathbed and you look back at your life and you ask yourself, and this is like how he actually started Amazon, would I regret that decision or not doing something? And if you would regret it on your deathbed, it's something that you should pursue. And when he was at D.E. Shaw, he had a great paying job, was doing really well. He told his boss that he wanted to start this internet company to sell books online. And basically his boss is like, that's a great idea for someone else, but Jeff, you probably shouldn't do that. And so his boss tried to talk him out of the idea. And Bezos apparently went back home and he said, let me sleep on it, think about it. And he came back and he said he came to the decision to leave his job, to start Amazon and move out to Seattle, because he's like, I would regret not doing this. And so I think that whole regret minimization framework is something that a lot of us, I at least for me, like, I don't really feel like I did really well before, but even now, like, in terms of taking a sabbatical, I was telling Lindsay, like, it was a hard decision for me to do because I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, taking a step back and like, time off just feels not normal from what I've done. I've never taken a sabbatical before. But then I thought about it and I was like, I take time off in my mid 40s to be able to reset and do some travel and do some other stuff. I was like, all these things, basically invest in myself and my family and friends. I was like, would I regret this on my deathbed? I was like, no, I wouldn't regret it. It's like, it's actually an easy decision when you reframe it.
Yeah.
It's a really great point, Mike, I think. And one of the things that I really appreciate about it is that it gives us a really sort of concrete framework or understanding of, how to make those very scary decisions And I would also add that, Alice, we've been friends for a number of years. I know that you're a very inner person, like a very spiritual person. And so, yes, to really go inside and to decide what is going to, make you truly happy. Or if I were to pursue, medicine and put in hundreds of hours of residency and what have you in training, that would have actually been you didn't say this, but soul sucking for you, just knowing that you wanted to pursue a different pathway. So I think that's one model. And then Jon, you giving us another model of really thinking about sort of what's happening, how you are influenced by what's happening on the outside.
Yeah.
And really trying to determine what your best course of action is by talking to people and engaging with your community. I think that these are really powerful ways for people to engage in a decision-making process. And what I'm learning from the three of you is that it's not necessarily first you do this and then you ignore your parents and then you reject what society says. But that there are so many different ways of going about it and making these decisions. But at the center of it is just a knowing that this is what feels right to you. And then having the courage, Jon, using your language, having the courage to just go fucking do it. So, and that's hard. And I'm curious to know from the two of you, and Mike, I'd love to hear, because I'd love to get into sort of maybe I don't want to say you are struggling by any stretch of the imagination, my goodness, finance and an executive director of a nonprofit organization. But, sometimes when we pursue creativity, there's some real struggles, right? There's financial, there's emotional, there's the cultural struggle of choosing a creative path. And I'm curious to know from the two of you, how do you deal with the fear of judgment or failure, especially when it comes to maybe your parents or people in our community, friends?
I answered it before. I don't care.
I knew you were going to say that.
Literally,
I was I don't fucking care. I'm going to do me.
I mean, in terms of I care about my parents and that I want them to know that I'm okay. I don't want them to worry, and even for the longest time, as I was doing my career, they didn't understand, quote unquote. And it wasn't until they actually stepped into they visited me in London, they stepped into the Tate, because I didn't really grow up in my family unit going to museums. It was more through public school that I learned it all. But so they know about museums, but they don't engage in it in their lives as much. But when they did come to visit me and they looked around, they're like, oh, this is real. This is what people do. And at the end of the day, they want to make sure, A, I am happy, I'm fulfilled, and I can, put a roof over my head and feed myself, right? Those are the kind of things that they cared about. So in the sense, I feel if I can allay their fears, that matters to me, But in terms of anyone else in the Asian American community not understanding what I do, I don't fear that. What I really love is when they're oh, what is that? I never heard of that. You can do something like that. And telling them and opening their eyes, yes, and this is how it's all done.
I appreciate the honesty.
I'll give you a different answer. So
Yeah.
how I grew up, so in high school, I went to an all boys prep school, right? And traditional sports in America, football, baseball, basketball, track and field, those are the things that I did. And the coach was always failure is not an option, right? And so that was, a very bold statement. But one of the things that I probably, no one really taught me this per se, and I didn't really learn this until later in life, right? If you think about a lot of very wealthy, I'm talking about uber wealthy families, right? When they send their kids to sports, they don't send them to traditional American sports, right? They usually are doing fencing, crew, rowing. And so the reason why is because when you go there, your goal is not to succeed, right? It's about being put in an arena with other people to network, right? And so you're networking with effectively some of the richest people's children, right? And so through that, you develop a very different mentality. It's not about beating someone or doing a team sport. Over time, those relationships are things that you will bring out of it. And I actually learned that in college in my fraternity house because our Greek motto is perge, which means persistence, right? And then they always said, you always keep doing things, right? And try to do things well, but you'll learn from your mistakes if you don't succeed. But the most valuable thing that you can do is to not only learn from your mistakes, but also learn from those around you. And effectively, the people around you are there supposedly forever, meaning that if you have people that you grew up with in college or whatever, you're like family. And you'll know that one day you might need to make that phone call and say, hey, you remember telling me that you were an actor? Like I need that acting job. And that's what I did. One of the first calls I made was one of my fraternity brothers who was an actor, and asked him for advice. I'm like, how do I become an actor like you? And that's what I did. I made the call, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks to both of you for sharing that. And I'm hearing two lessons from both of you. And the first one from Alice is that when you think about judgment or failure, especially from people like your parents or just in general, the Asian community, when it came, Alice, to your parents, it was really important to you actually that you bring them into your world. And so that they can have a concrete understanding to see, right? Exactly. What do you do on sort of a day in, day out? What does it mean to work in a creative context? And then that was really important to you. And I really want to highlight that because I think that in general, in the Asian community, we are generally raised to really honor and respect our parents. And so to just say, screw it, I'm just going to pursue this. Like I'm going to leave medicine or I'm going to leave engineering or I'm not going to be a lawyer. I think that generally that can be really difficult for folks in our community. But to hear you say that, one, it's really important to you to, bring your parents in, and I'm still going to pursue what I need to get done. I'm just imagining the listener, the person who's watching this right now, feeling a sense of relief from that. And Jon, what I hear from you is that finding community is really important, and leveraging the people in your community, that it wasn't ever, is it fair to say that you're not really concerned about judgment or failure, but that it was more important for you to immerse yourself inside of contexts where you felt as though you could build friendships, build relationships, and that you really looked at finding folks in your community as opportunities to take those first steps into creative industry.
It's a great summary. I also like to add, that's probably a summation of me being an only child, right? I was forced to make friends. I had no friends.
Yeah.
Or, I had no brothers and sisters like Alice did. So I forced myself to go out there to meet people at a very early part of my life, right? Because I had no one to play with at home. And luckily, no one judged me, which I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. Maybe if I had an older brother that would like say, maybe you shouldn't have done this or shit, I probably would have made as many bad decisions.
Yeah. No, I think true. Mike is very, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say, I think that's true. I mean, I'm an only child, and I think when you grow up, I think a lot of people like to shit on only children because you can grow up in a way that it's not, constructive. But I think there's a bunch of people that grow up in a way where, like you said, you don't have siblings. So you end up either becoming really close to your close friends. Like I would say some of my closest friends growing up are closer than any blood brother I feel like I would ever have, just because I feel like we get along better. And your blood brother may or may not think like you or like certain things you do, but your close friends, I feel like you can be very, very tight. And also I think as a kid, as an only child, I grew up with a ton of adults, and my parents would have parties and stuff, and they'd have adults over. And I remember just being very comfortable sitting down talking to adults because there were no iPads and internet. So I was sitting around having conversations with adults, and I'm like, okay, it didn't feel that weird. So I grew up talking to adults since I was a kid. And it's I think it's kind of a good thing in a way, right? To your point, Jon.
Yeah.
I think Jon and Mike, you guys are very, very similar in that you're both like master networkers. And one thing that I've learned from Mike and Jon, I think I learned this from you as well, like watching you from afar, is that to really find your people, to network, to build relationships, and to really allocate all of your thinking into that, as opposed to being concerned about maybe judgment or failure or what have you. I don't want to say that you both aren't necessarily, but I think that you are both very skilled at just I'm just going to go get it.
Yeah. I think as my younger years, I probably was a lot more, let's call it liberal. I tend to be a little more conservative now, only because, Alice always says, you're not, I just go out there, I have no fear, right? And I don't care what judge, kind of almost like you, right? But now Alice is like, well, sometimes, you may not be everyone's cup of tea. And I started thinking, I was like, what does that mean? I was like, am I being too creative or too unique, that I stick out?
It's not that you shouldn't try doing it. It's just I feel like, if you're not someone's cup of tea and they're giving you signs by their body language or they just stop talking, you're a little too eager to please. That's all.
And again, that's another thing for the younger viewers. I learned a lot later in life. One of the managing directors at the bank taught me reading body language. When I took the year off to become an actor, I got an agent, right? And he said, an improv if you want to get into comedy, right? So that's what I did. And that's one of the things that they teach you, especially in stand-up, is like, you got to read the room, right? I mean, if you can't read the room, properly, right? You'll just make a fool of yourself. No one's going to laugh. No one's going to take you seriously. Whatever your goal is in terms of communications.
That's true.
That's true. No, definitely. That's great. And Jon, actually, you mentioned rest. I'd love to transition these last sort of 10, 15 minutes that we have together. Can we talk about rest? Because I know that you took a year off of banking to pursue acting. I imagine that must have been a difficult decision to say, I'm no longer going to work at an investment bank. And here's maybe the Asian in me. Oh, financial stability. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to pursue this sabbatical effectively. Could you talk about your decision-making process?
So I want to go first, and you can add to it. So yeah, I mean, there was an earlier part in my career when I was in my early 20s where I got involved in a startup for 9 months, right? And I learned inside, even though it was only 9 months, I learned so much about startups, right? And the things that you learn working in a startup is all about the concept of a runway, which means, once you, let's say, start a company, you raise your angel funding or your venture capital, there's a limited amount of money that'll get you from point A to point B, right? And so if your point A is I start from zero revenue or capital, and then you want to get to a certain profitability or capital target or asset, then, you have I'll make up a number, 12 months, right? And so so I had to think like that and say, okay, do I have enough savings and investments in my net worth to effectively withstand not having any income for 12 months or whatever, how long it takes me to get to become a paying actor, right? And so, because I'm sure there's a lot of investment initially into taking classes and going to auditions and networking and whatever, you just don't overnight become an actor, right? For me, it was a very calculated decision. And then of course, having to consider my other half, I asked her, I said, are you okay with this? And she was like, sure, as long as you have the runway. But then telling our parents was very interesting because when I told her parents, obviously they were just shocked. They were just like, are you serious? Right, traditional Taiwanese parents, I think they're their 70s, 80s now? 80s, yeah. And they were just like, I could tell they were trying to be supportive, but they were still very worried about their daughter. And then where are they going to live? Move in with us.
They're like, please don't move in, please.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No. I was going to say, but I think I think it's a really good point that you brought up, Jon, is when you want to make a quote unquote, not traditional move, right? From sort of an traditional Asian family into something, whether let's call it acting, right? Or in film. Doing that, I think the problem is so many, and this may be probably a question for everyone, is why is it that these Asian parents only sort of pride themselves in, hey, I want you to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or business or whatever. It's to me, and my parents were like that. They were like, hey, they didn't force me, but I think they were sort of gently nudging me. Oh yeah, maybe you should be a doctor. You're really good at science. And I really like science. And I remember I was pre-med for my first 2 years at UCLA, and I changed my career, and I remember changing my mind. My parents kind of freaked out too, but they were like, okay, I didn't choose film. I think if I chose film, they may have reacted more. I told them, I said, I'm going to change my major in economics and international area studies. And they were like confused. They're like, wait, what exactly does this mean? Like, are you spending another year or two at college? Like, what's going on? And I think that, to me, it's interesting because all these immigrants, generally speaking, if I'm stereotyping, a lot of these parents who are immigrants have this specific view on what they want their kids to do. And I think it's from a good place, because probably the safety of the career, right? It's like what they think is like, quote unquote, a safe job, right? Versus going into like, whether it's the creative industry or like starting a restaurant or do any, like you could do anything like that. And I feel like it's viewed as, ooh, that's like riskier. And I don't know if you're going to be okay doing that. I think Asian parents tend to have that kind of negative reaction.
That's a really good question. One of the things because my dad is a doctor, and he is the eldest son of immigrant parents. And I always felt as though, and Mike, I've shared this with you before, I wonder if medicine or even being a lawyer, engineer, if it was really pushed by at least his family and then our community in general, because it's one of the few industries that is, I think, sort of a meritocracy. You have to take a test, you have to get grades in order to rise to that position. Whereas my dad, I know, would have never been hired by an investment bank. My grandparents would have never been hired by an investment bank, just purely based on the time in which they grew up. Alice and John, I don't know if you guys have.
I think that's completely right. I think I'm just speaking from my own family background, that is what they knew. The industries that you listed off, Mike, purely, I think, because it comes from like just deep-rooted Chinese culture, which in order to rise in the ranks of the government, which is then like the big, it's what you want to do is you took tests, you took exams, and that brought you into that level of respectability, brought you into the level of this is the kind of job you want. I think it just filters through, at least for, I think, all of our parents, if I'm not mistaken, who all came to this country, oftentimes through education, right? Through school.
Yeah.
Some end up in the States through their education. So they knew that this is the way forward. And the dream that they had of America was you take these respectable jobs, these white collar jobs, that gives you stability, because whatever background they may come in, they probably didn't find stability within their lives and their history. So they want to give that to their children, as I'm sure as parents, you feel the same way about your kids. And their minds didn't feel like anything risky was worth it, because they came from a place where it was very risky in their lives. So why would you impart that on your kids, right? That's something that they feel, quote unquote, be the American dream, which we are now kind of turning on its head, right? Because we're thinking, what is the American dream? What does that mean? What does that really look like? And for some people, it is. It is banking, it is medicine, it is all those things. And it fulfills you in a way that, you feel authentically who you are, and you can still love the things you love, then go for it, right? But I think going back a little bit to sort of, your question, Lindsay, how do you go about doing what you love? How do you break free from what is expected of you? I think a lot of that is like every person has to come to the fact to decipher for themselves, what's your priority? What matters to you in life? And Mike, what you were saying about Jeff Bezos and that framework, it's you prioritize. What is it now? God forbid, are not here tomorrow. What is it that you want to put your time into, your efforts into, your thoughts into? And that's going to dictate what you do, right? Like if it's going to be your family, then it's about, I need to be intentional with my time with my family. If it's going to be your career, then you're intentional in that way.
That makes sense. And actually, I was going to just make a comment on something John said earlier. Is I think because we didn't see a lot of Asians in some of these roles, like whether it's in film, right? Or in your case, Alice, like even maybe, I don't know, if your family didn't grow up in sort of the art world, right? Like you don't have as many role models to see in those positions. And I feel like that is changing now for sure. So I wonder, with parents in the next second, third, fourth generation, how this will change in terms of the view and expectations of the jobs that their kids will take. Because I think for us now, like, to me, it's like, I don't really care what our kids pursue. I think it's more of, I want you to be happy doing it, but I also want you to like really do your best at it, right? Whatever it is. And I think, I think it's almost like, I want to say it's more acceptable today now, right? If you said you want to pursue, I don't know, film and you want to be a producer or whatever. I think it's way more acceptable today than it was, 30, 40 years ago. It's like there were very few people that honestly that probably were able to break into the industry. And I remember like, even looking recently, I was telling John, I was at this gold house, this gold gala, and they were honoring one of the famous Asian directors. And it's like he was like basically saying, he's like, I was one of the only people that look like me. And he's from Taiwan. He was like, people were like, I don't know, this is a good idea for you to do this because there was no one that would really support him back then. Then, he had some great movies and then became famous, but that was Ong Lee, right? It's like there are people that became famous as a result, but I think it was through a lot of hardship.
Yeah. I don't want to speak for you, John, but I think what also fueled him to want to pursue the acting is because he's seen so many more Asian American faces on screen saying, oh, this is fantastic. I see myself in it. And I think growing up subliminally, because I didn't see any of that, it really did affect sort of my thinking and what I was able to do, what I was capable of doing. But I think, things are changing now. And I think that's great. I think for kids now to see that and anything is possible. And, because we're now like first, second, third, fourth generation Asian in America. It's a whole different playing field, I think, for us.
For sure.
It is.
And it's changing.
I'm curious to know for any young married couple who are thinking about transitioning, they are just recognizing that maybe what they're doing is just not for them and they're feeling a pull or a calling. Do you have any advice for that couple or even that individual?
I think for married couples, let's start with that. I think we view ourselves as a team. We like to call ourselves like the A-Team. It's a very old TV show from back in the days. But
now everyone knows your age, John. So,
like whenever, if you remember that TV show, right? Because, you guys are similar age as us, right? We're like when one person gets stuck, let's say one guy gets caught, he's in jail, the other three will blast him out, It's kind of like that. It's like you're always there for each other, right? So if one person's kind of like in a mental dilemma or a career path, dilemma. As a married couple, I mean, you're supposed to be there for each other and you're supposed to be each other's sounding board. And, sometimes the advice might be a bit more biased, right? But I think in the end, both of you are all looking for each other's best interest, right? She's always giving me advice whether I want it or not.
But what's key about that, John, is it's always good advice. Yes.
Single people, I think for the single people, I definitely like to say I probably made a lot of bad decisions in life, but I don't regret them either. I think as a single person, I think role models are very important. Even at my age now, I think, when I was getting into acting, the three people who I followed the most, one was Jimmy Yang, the second was Simu Liu, and the third was Awkwafina. We all had three things in common, that we all lost our jobs and they basically give us an opportunity to choose a different path, right? And so Jimmy worked at Morgan Stanley like I did, right? Before he, got his big break on Silicon Valley. Simu was an accountant, got fired before he got his big break on this comedy show in Canada. Do you remember it was Kim's Convenience Store? And then Awkwafina, she worked for a New York City PR agency and, effectively put up like a rap video on YouTube, got fired for that, and then just said, screw it. I'm doing my own thing. I'm going to pursue music, comedy, and acting and whatnot. And it was really interesting because I actually got to meet two of them in person in LA. And I think that's another opportunity that we have living in Los Angeles here, is that you're around so many creatives. And they were very approachable. I mean, when I went up to Jimmy and Awkwafina, they were not only open to taking photos from us, but I asked them tons of questions and was asking them, how do I become an actor? And what were you feeling when you were in this movie or that show or that film, So yeah, I would say to the singles and the married couples in the world, don't be afraid to go out there and like ask questions and follow a role model, right? Yeah. And that role model doesn't have to be in the same industry that you're in today. It could be in something that you might be, it's a reach, but you might as well, go out there and try it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. And there you are putting into practice, like going out and finding your community, finding your people.
Yeah, finding your people.
Finding your people, yeah, literally. Alice, how about you?
So I think building upon what John said earlier, I think communication is key. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
and honest and vulnerable about the things that you want, the things you might be scared of. But at the end of the day, you should be each other's biggest cheerleader, you know, really offer the sense of like, yes, I believe in you, you're going to do it. But also on the flip side, okay, practically, what does this look like? Right? Like you can't just go in blind without like, you know, head in the clouds. You still have to be quite practical about it. Like if I'm, you know, in a moment in my career that isn't the best and he's thriving, you know, we can balance each other out, vice versa. If he's kind of struggling in a moment and I'm doing well, like how do we help each other through that? Because at the end of the day, it's just, you know, you really should be each other's sort of best friends and know all the things that are happening, because when you internalize and you don't speak freely about it, you feel alone. And then you also feel, I think the thoughts of self-doubt or the fear, like that all creeps in and takes hold when it really shouldn't. And I think for young couples doing that, obviously be supportive, be practical, be loving, and also just be patient with yourselves, you know, give yourself a little bit of grace as you navigate through. And I feel like everyone has this in them, but there is that small, still voice that is going to nudge you one way or make you feel a certain way that I think is the most real voice. It's instinctively who you are. And I think you just have to listen to that more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, both of you, for sharing that and for really impressing upon us. You know, it's important to go out and find your community. It's important to support one another as a married couple and to be each other's biggest cheerleaders. And one of the things, again, I continue to learn this over and over as I watch both of you and Mike, you too, you know, in your career, just having the courage to do something different, however you define it. Maybe it's taking a year off, or it's taking a 6-month sabbatical, or it's saying I'm not going to do pre-med when I'm in college and I'm going to pursue this creative industry. You know, it's really incredible. And you're such an example, I think, the three of you, as people who are really pursuing their authentic desire and wants and not being tethered and held to sort of someone else's expectations. And Alice, you know, and John, you spoke to this as well, but also being very practical about it. And Mike is like the poster child of like practicality. And John, I know when you were talking about like that 12-month runway, like he was like, Linz, you know, and really sort of making sure your family is safe, that you'll be able to sustain and forego a salary if that creative pursuit should call for that. So I thank you, both of you, so much for today. Yeah. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Courage Class. I hope today's conversation gave you a little encouragement and inspiration. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And for extra motivation, tools, and behind-the-scenes content, sign up for my newsletter. I'd love to share with you more there. See you next time.